Western Pacific, Reshaping the Future Fight. Please take a moment and silence your devices for us.
That's more whatever we can. Old school.
Okay. All right, welcome everybody to this next panel discussion. I'm Bill Hamblett from the Naval Institute, Editor-in-Chief for Proceedings, and it's my pleasure to introduce the moderator of this panel. I can't think of a better moderator, a former 7th Fleet Commander, retired Vice Admiral Bill Merz. Admiral Merz is a 1986 graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy, a career submarine officer. He commanded nuclear deep-sea vessel NR-1, the attack submarine USS Memphis, submarine development squadron 12, and finally the U.S. 7th Fleet. He also served as Director of Undersea Warfare, OPNAV N97, Director of Requirements, OPNAV N9, and Director of Operations and Policy, OPNAV N3, N5. Since leaving active duty, Admiral Merz has served as Vice President of Operations of Entergy in Houston and is currently the Senior Vice President for Aerospace and Defense Technologies for Oceaneering International Incorporated. Admiral Merz, the panel's yours, sir.
Okay, Bill, thanks. Can you guys hear me in the back? Good, all right. All right, well, good morning, everybody. Great to be here. This is actually my first event since retirement. You know that 3 and 4 stars have this two-year bonus cooling off period after we retire, so it's really good to be back and see everybody. So today's panel is on how the current Westpac operations shape the future fight. As Bill said, I'm Bill Merz, I'm your moderator, but with me today we have 2 tremendously experienced flag officers. We have the Deputy Commander of the Royal Canadian Navy, Rear Admiral Steve Waddell, and of course the current 7th Fleet Commander, Vice Admiral Fred Kacher. So what I plan to do is start with a few remarks, and then in turn summarize in a little bit more detail the experience of our 2 panelists, and then ask them to also provide a few remarks. And then from there, we'll tee up a few topics for discussion and then turn it over to you all for questions. So for those that know me, my views have been shaped by persistently operating in and around the pacing threat over many operational tours, with the mission being keeping them off balance in all domains with our head-hurting pace of play, complex operations, and probably the silent partner in that is our ability to own the friction in all domains. So what do I mean by friction? That means owning the night, owning the weather, owning the uncertainty. All of which it is an advantage to us, a disadvantage to them. And in essence, if you're a study of General Mattis, he would offer that is the job of keeping them up at night. So that said, in many ways, the current operations of the fleet is somewhat opposite of what this conference represents. So this is a conference of future capability and technology. KT, I see you out there. Feel free to jump in. Another 7th Fleet Commander. So in this conference, there's a tremendous buzz around here. It's a very exciting place to be, and it's a fantastic gathering. The fleet, on the other hand, is the world of current operations, not future operations. It's the world that's real, that has to leverage what it has in order to win. And there's a buzz out there as well, but that is the buzz of drones at night, missiles overhead, J-20s in your face, random ordnance tossed overboard, or bullets tinking off your bridge wing. We like to think of ourselves out in the Western Pacific as cavemen, just out there trying to make fire with the tools that we have. And they do it quite well. So what the team of the 10 task forces and numerous allies and partners are doing out there under the command of 7th Fleet is providing this conference the playbook of what is needed for the future. When, what, and where. So for our discussion today, I'll provide a few topics of interest, I hope, that bridge the now with the future, and maybe provide some insight on what technologies that are most pressing that we must lean into. So there's 5 of these. I'll go through them fairly quickly. But first and foremost is understanding that how we fight is as important as what we fight with. Cross-domain, cross-service, cross-agency, and across our allies and partners, and enabling that through efficient training and practice. Again, winning with what you have, not what you wish you had, which will always be the case. So when we commit to this mentality of cross-domain warfare, we have demonstrated it's an immediate force multiplier. We are outnumbered in every domain, yet we are confident in every domain, very confident. It's not just a numbers game. It's lethality and experience and how we come together as a team. So second is deterrence is the game. Fail to deter, everyone loses. Those that want to fight have not experienced a fight. And the way we operate ensures and advances the fundamental tenet of deterrence that forces them to conclude every single day that today is not the day, and making them believe that if they choose to fight, we will crush them. Also second, logistics is the other game. So there's 2 games. The trains must be running within 2 weeks of a conflict, and that's a huge challenge. Third, our allies and partners. Almost nothing we do today is unilateral. I'd like to tell you that's by design, but the reality is it's the reality. The fights and the challenges are too big and too broad to do it alone. So by, with, and through. And in the Western Pacific, there is no NATO out there. Instead, there are over 30 bilateral relationships that Fred Kacher has to manage and keep on balance. And here's the thing. Most of them don't get along with each other. So anytime you get a consortium of 2 or 3 nations to work together, it's often a temporary condition. So we've had great advances in the Quad, ASEAN, and those need to continue. Fourth is our command and control and our maritime operations centers. Which ones are supporting, which ones are supported, and when, and having the agility to shift those on demand and then practice it. And fifth and finally is building and maintaining the skills to lead at this level and to understand the immense span of control. We've all grown up in our communities. We're all experts in our communities. Where we struggle is when we come out of our shells and we have to play nice with the other communities. No one's going to win this on their own. The only solution is to work together. So from these topics, I think we can expand the conversation in any direction, including maybe Hellscape and AUKUS. So while that percolates a little bit, I'll introduce our two panelists and then provide the opportunity for their remarks as well. So first we have Rear Admiral Steve Waddell, Deputy Commander, Royal Canadian Navy. Originally from Northern Ontario, Steve is a career surface warfare officer. He's deployed throughout the globe while conducting UN security operations, counterterrorism operations, and counter-piracy operations. He commanded the frigates HMCS Charlottetown and Fredericton, and the Canadian Forces Base Esquimalt. As a flag officer, he served as Director General for Naval Strategic Readiness, Vice Commander of the U.S. Second Fleet in Norfolk, and of course his current position now as the Deputy Commander. Steve graciously offered to join our panel only yesterday after a late notice cancellation. So yet again, another example of our reliance on our partners. Lucky to have you, Steve. Thanks for joining us. Next we have Commander U.S. 7th Fleet, Admiral Fred Kacher, from Oakton, Virginia. He's Naval Academy graduate and also a career surface warfare officer. Fred is also deployed throughout the globe and has held residence overseas on multiple occasions. Early in Fred's career, he commanded the USS Stockdale and he had major command of Desron 7. Fred's flag officer tours included Expeditionary Strike Group 7 and Task Force 76, where he pretty much ruled the Pacific during the COVID era. Deputy CNO for Operations and Policy and Superintendent of the U.S. Naval Academy. And despite these extremely challenging jobs, Fred somehow found time to write, either author or co-author, multiple books. Books that typically help out the junior officers behind him, including Naval Officer's Guide to the Pentagon. That's a real survival manual if you haven't read it. And then Command at Sea. So a close friend and outstanding officer. Fred, thanks for taking your time to join us out here from across the globe. I don't know what time zone you're in biologically, but we'll hold you up if we need to. So Steve, over to you. Get us going here.
Great. Thanks very much, Admiral. And a couple of things to kind of reflect on as I listen to your opening comments. First, it's a great privilege to certainly be here, participating in West 25 and in the panel discussions, and certainly representing my Navy, my commander here, Admiral Topsy, for the few days that we're here. But it also speaks to the importance of the fight tonight mantra. You made mention, of course, regrettably the Coast Guard was not available for this panel, but it speaks to how we need to be ready and agile in every instance, whether it's on the front line, whether it's in the supporting framework, whether it's in environments like this, and certainly being able to just immediately jump in as a fire team partner in any instance is what this is really all about. And so being a part of this is certainly appreciated, and I'm just grateful to be able to contribute to the discussion. When I first met yourself here and Admiral Kacher here, I've known of both of you before. We've met briefly on a couple of occasions, but you were talking about a couple of names as ships participating in your AO. He started talking about Ottawa and Montreal and Vancouver, and I thought he was talking about hockey teams. And I said, it shows where my mindset is at as a Canadian, I suppose, but that's what I first thought he was talking about. But as it turns out, no, we're talking about the persistent commitment of the Royal Canadian Navy to the theater and participating in the rules-based international order, and certainly being postured with all of our partners and allies in theater, and that just speaks to how we're there. I think I'd like to make 3 quick points as sort of opening comments. The first, like the United States, Canada is an Indo-Pacific nation. Sometimes we seem to have to remind our politicians back east that that's true as they look to their roots to Europe across the Atlantic. But we are an Indo-Pacific nation, and that is why our persistent presence in the Indo-Pacific matters. Even before we had articulated an Indo-Pacific strategy, the Royal Canadian Navy, and certainly in the entirety of my career, has been in the Indo-Pacific, and that is not going to be changing. Certainly over the last 10 years, given the pacing threat as it's unfolded, we have been persistent in that domain, and sir, I know you can attest to our presence in the AO as part of that. And even so, as a member of the Western Pacific Naval Symposium. I will be hosting all of the members of that group at the next workshop on the west coast of Canada this summer. So yes, Canada is an Indo-Pacific partner. The second thing I'd like to point out, that Indo-Pacific strategy that is fundamental to our participation and operations in the region is a funded program. It commits up to 3 RCN ships per year from our ORBAT. That's not a small undertaking, particularly at the same time as that Canada has its NATO obligations to the east and increasingly Arctic obligations to the north. These in and of themselves are not insignificant ventures, things to apply resources and time and effort to, but when you're focusing in 3 different directions at the same time, for a large country but a smaller population, that's not an insignificant challenge to be participating in. But we are there, and I know that you know that we're there. The third item I think I'd like to highlight is that despite the press, despite the reporting, Canada is committed to defense renewal and investment. The onset of Our North Strong and Free, a new defense policy, commits to that funding, $70 billion over the next 20 years. Again, not an insignificant number for a country like Canada, a commitment to achieve 2% and beyond of GDP for NATO contributions. These are significant investments that will underpin our ability to be able to support operations in the Indo-Pacific and beyond. And it's not just there, it's Arctic surveillance. Again, it's NATO reassurance, it's cyber, undersea, electronic warfare, and new fleets. New fleets are being built as we speak. The 6th Arctic and Offshore Patrol vessel is about to be turned over to us, providing phenomenal work in the north. And the River-class destroyer, our fighting edge ship, Aegis enabled, and relying on our partners in the United States to help become an Aegis Navy to ensure that we're able to be meaningful contributors to the fight in the years and the decades again. So that's the 3 points I wanted to highlight here, but certainly I know the focus on the panel is going to be talking about preparing for the fight, and I want to make sure that we support that discussion, and so looking forward to the conversation and the questions that come. Thank you, sir.
Well, terrific to be here. Even though my body is telling me it's 3:30 in the morning, Tokyo time. First, let me start with some thanks. One, wonderful to be up here with my panel members and having a boss and mentor and Admiral Mers here leading this discussion. But also to AFCEA and USNI, not just for the 35th iteration of West, but when I think about my journey as a junior officer, both of those organizations, events, mentors, recognition when I wasn't sure if this was the profession for me, candidly, or if I was good enough to do it, they have been with me all along the way, and just very, very thankful for that. I'd also I've got some personal heroes and friends in the crowd, classmates, department head on my first destroyer, and Mike Salvedo, many other friends and teammates. Thank you for here, and this really represents the spirit, a team of teams. Carl Thomas, who's been a mentor and I've turned over to a couple times, just great to see so many people here. Now, you may not wish to be assigned responsibility for me being up here, but for those of you who played a role in my life, thank you. Admiral Mers, I've worked for him twice. One time 1,000 miles away, one time 30 feet away. Both were great experiences, although quite different. And he's used to me talking in paragraphs, not sentences. So if you'll allow me, I'm going to tell a story. And this story is a little bit for the JOs as much as any else, because I see a few of you out there, and it's great to have you here. I was finishing up a job on the Joint Staff, and my good friend John Wade, who was right up in this panel yesterday, he said, "Hey, Fred, the major command list is out, and I hear you're going to Singapore." And I'm like, there ain't no destroyers in Singapore. That can't be right. Well, it wouldn't be the first time or the last time that I said John Wade was right and I was wrong. But we headed out to Singapore, and that move to Desron 7 began a 12-year journey with 5 overseas jobs, 3 commands in the Pacific, in the Western Pacific, and 8 years living overseas, vice here back home in this country that I know we all love and care about. And what that shared with me, it gave me an appreciation for the Western Pacific and that this is a region, the Asia-Pacific, is going to define our next decade and our next century, not just for the United States, but I think for the globe. So now I have the privilege of commanding and being entrusted to 27,000 sailors and Marines in 7th Fleet, 50 to 70 ships, 100 to 200 aircraft, depending on who we have in theater, and it is an absolute privilege. And when those ships leave places like Sasebo and Yokosuka and Singapore and pass that last sea buoy, they are immediately interacting with allies and partners and frankly mixing it up with potential adversaries as well. So the observations I share with you today, they're not a feeling, they're not a hunch. Those are things that we have directly observed, measured, and enumerated. And there's no denying that in the Pacific, the PLAN has become more expansive, more assertive, and they are working more closely with the Russians. And that is something that we have seen. But that does not compare to the lattice work of relationships we have with our allies and partners. And the notion of the team of teams, which General McChrystal's book is on my 7th Fleet reading list. You can look it up, as Yogi Berra would say, or Casey Stengel. And whether we're talking about the joint force, allies and partners represented in my wonderful Canadian teammate, or our efforts to work together to deter and, if called upon, fight and win, those are very real things out in the theater, and I look forward to the future discussion and conversations that we're going to have today, sir.
Okay, thanks for the kickoff, and Fred, you're just always gracious.
Ready to go.
Always ready to go. So we can start filtering questions whenever you desire. I think we have mics. Just come up to the mic and line up. But in the meantime, I'm going to ask the panelists a pretty broad question. As I teed it up by separating what the conference focus is and what maybe Admiral Kacher and Admiral Waddell's focus is, for both of you, what do you need out of this conference? What is the direction you need this conference to go, and how are the drilling downwards and backwards into your operations affect that output?
May I jump in? Well, sir, I will hearken back to a former 7th Fleet commander. His motto was "play hard." Mine is one team. So if we put those together, we will say play hard as one team. And I see fights on back in with. I love that. I wish I could have stolen it, Carl. But as working together as that team of teams, what I would say is my boss, Admiral Kaler, and I'm his maneuver arm for Pacific Fleet, talks about speed and persistence. So I would just ask you to view this broadly as we look at all the efforts that we make to deter. So you are indeed very much a part of this team that is going to help us solve the problems in the Pacific. So I will not come up here with a wish list of widgets or a particular capability, but rest assured, anything that helps us to sense, deceive, dazzle, camouflage, engage in kinetic fires or non-kinetic fires, we are interested in. Because we are going to need to be greater than the sum of our parts to address the challenges in the Pacific, and there are great opportunities as well because they are bigger than one service and they are bigger than one nation.
Yeah, I think what I'm thinking about to kind of answer that question, sir, is as I walk the trade floor here and I talk to the various vendors, I realize that the opportunity and the extraordinary innovation that's at play is really gratifying. There is incredible ingenuity at play at this conference. And we, of course, we know we need to leverage that. We know we need to incorporate that. We know that it informs our thinking and our establishment of requirements as we build capabilities to be ready for whatever fight may come our way. And so the force developers, the capability investments, those are fundamental to make sure that we are maintaining pace, and outmaneuvering in terms of pace any adversary. So it's invigorating when you talk to the people here to realize what we're all collectively capable of. But we're talking about being in the business of on the leading edge, being ready to fight tonight. And so what I learned in standing up U.S. Second Fleet with Woody Lewis at the time, as we landed on the motto for Second Fleet, and he talks about how I think he had run into Jim Mattis, and his guiding principles in standing it up is, hey, you're going to be the new commander of Second Fleet. Just make sure you're ready to fight. And so that kind of became the mantra of Second Fleet. And I learned from that. And as we worked through standing up a mock, as we worked through understanding how we are going to be the maneuver arm in the Atlantic and linking into the Northern Atlantic fight up to our allies and partners in the High North, you recognize, and I recognize, that being ready to fight was fundamental to all of this. And sir, you were making comments about how your aircraft were sitting there on patrol but unarmed. And your question was, well, why is that? They need to be armed because they have to be ready in an instant. And so I'm invigorated about the future development here, but it needs to be transportable and immediately implementable for a fight tonight. And so that ready to fight principle is now factored into our guiding principles in my own Navy, where our three priorities are people, platforms, and ready to fight. And we are fundamentally reshaping how we think about ensuring that as we man, train, and equip, as you characterize it, we're doing the same things at home to make sure that we can plug and play in an instant for whatever we need to do, enabled by whichever commands are in theater, 7th Fleet, 6th Fleet, 5th Fleet, it doesn't matter where, but I know we're talking Indo-Pacific, so we want to make sure we are ready to fight, and that's the commitment and that's the capability that we are driving and pushing forward each and every day.
Okay, great. So, still on, right? Yeah. So, ricocheting off of that, I have my own General Mattis story, and this is going to be touching on the allies and partners. So when he was CENTCOM, I was the mine warfare commander, and he asked the question of, well, what does it take to open up the Strait of Hormuz if it gets mined? And I gave him the wildly unsatisfying answer of, it depends, and which I've learned about mine warfare. He went on to explain to me how many allies, partners, and friendly nations rely on that strait, and then press me harder on what do I need to get that strait open on his timeline. To which he completed the sentence with, I'm a 4-star Marine general. I don't feel a lot of stress, but I can create a lot of stress, which he would routinely do. That was a leader who was immensely connected between the technology, the capabilities, the processes and procedures, and the mental attitude of fighting. So on that note, I'm a firm believer that everything we develop and everything we practice has to be through the lens of allies and partners. And that takes a lot of work. We have a lot of them out there, and they come with a variety of capabilities. So integrating them in to the domains where they have capability, and then having them support in elements of extreme challenges such as logistics, that's the chore. So I'll turn it over to you two on comments on the same.
Thanks. Well, thank you, sir. For the United States Navy and for 7th Fleet, our alliances and our partnership are our asymmetric advantage. They are the strongest they've ever been, and they're getting stronger. Just last week, back in Yokosuka, I was in a commander's update brief with my Japanese counterpart, my Australian counterpart, and my French counterpart as well, Admiral Pinget, as we prepare and are working with Charles de Gaulle. We truly are greater than the sum of our parts. So everything from Australia and Japan, who are our local, very, very key partners, to our allies and partners who are affiliated with NATO and the European theater, but now are dedicated in investing the most profound investment we can make in maritime security in the Asia-Pacific, a carrier strike group in the form of Italy, France, eventually United Kingdom with Prince of Wales. All those things add up. And Steve has talked eloquently about the Canadian ships that have also contributed. More profoundly, when our potential adversaries look south and they see dozens of nations working at sea together, 7th Fleet executes 1,000 engagements a year, over 300 operations, activities, and investments, more substantial investments in operations at sea. I think there is a deterrent value to that. And all of us are nations that over the last 80 years have worked to support a system that, while some may say is imperfect, it has lifted 1 billion people out of poverty worldwide. We've seen 11 nations in 1942 that were democracies to almost 100 today. Small nations existing alongside large ones. So none of that is possible without the work of our allies and partners. And again, as I talk often when I am visiting the capitals in the region and visiting other navies, the sea connects us all. I think the Royal Navy says the sea is one. And those challenges and the opportunities of the Asia-Pacific, they're bigger than one nation, as I mentioned before. So that's the way we look at it, sir. That really is the coin of the realm out there. And Steve, I welcome your thoughts, and I'd welcome any advice you have in helping us be a better ally and partner of choice, because that is a key effort for us out in 7th Fleet.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that, sir. I think to pick up on that, a couple of thoughts. I think it starts with having honest conversations about what we are truly capable of as individual services and nations. Our forces are a reflection of our national investment of treasure. And when we understand and are honest about what we have and what we're capable of providing, that can really inform the operational planning of those partners who we choose to be partners with, and then certainly are enabled as allies. So when I offer capabilities to your AO, having honest conversations about what we bring to the fight underpins exactly what you can do with those maneuver elements. And when we have those honest conversations, it can only be enabled by visiting each other face-to-face, followed up by VTC, and having those conversations to make sure that you know where you can move us and posture us. That's fundamental to any of this. I know in my Navy that I'm operating with an older fleet. It is armed to the extent we can. It is capable of being forward where it is. And when we're honest about what those fighting elements are, I think that gives you option space in what we can do. I also know that we can refocus on that which we were successful in the past, and that's in anti-submarine warfare. We can be key contributing partners in theater ASW across the Indo-Pacific, and we can and will do that to allow you to focus with other elements at your disposal to be able to carry on with the operational planning that you need to do. On top of that, I also know that, and I referred to this earlier, that Canada has 3 important flanks. We have the Indo-Pacific, we have the Euro-Atlantic, and we have the Arctic. Our investments in the Arctic and making sure that that flank is covered, whether it's through NORAD modernization, whether it's through maritime warning, whether it's through pushing forward Arctic-capable platforms into that theater, allows for reassurance among allies to make sure that you can focus where you need to because we've got your back. A secure continent means that you can focus in the expeditionary. So that's what I think about in terms of allies and partners and what we can bring to the fight.
Thanks, Steve.
No, that's great, Steve. That's very powerful. And to put a period on that, then we'll move to questions. You know, in the Western Pacific, we often measure our success by the tone and tenor of the demarches we get back from the pacing threat. And to put it in context, you know, we do routine Taiwan Strait transits to remind the world that it is an international strait, which we generate at a demarche almost every time. If Fred sends 2 ships through at the same time, the demarche is quicker. it's stronger. If Fred sends a ship through with an ally or a partner, it's an immediate demarche and it's epic.
And the ally gets the demarche as well.
And the allies get the demarche as well. And also, I appreciate your comment on old ships. I have served 3 times on the oldest ship in the Navy, one being the USS Blue Ridge, which Fred is aboard now. So we do the spectrum of age here in the U.S. Navy. We're not immune to old age. And democracies, Fred, great comment. Funny thing about democracies, they just tend not to go to war with each other. So it's always a noble cause to bring more into the fold. So with that, we will start with our first question here on the right.
Good morning, gentlemen. Proud to be a classmate of Admiral Kacher, but since I've retired from the Navy, I'm in a company that does uncrewed systems. And we do a lot of them to Ukraine. Right now, we delivered thousands of them. So this is my question related to our allies and partners in uncrewed systems up in that part, that really strategic, important part of the world. You know, in Ukraine, we have NATO surrounding the Ukrainians. We have a willing partner. There's a lot of experimentation, a lot of good effects with particularly attack drones, and there's a willingness right now to get things there quickly. Are you seeing, you know, my concern being in Taiwan and other places along the First Island chain, we're getting in the way of ourselves, particularly our allies and partners, there's a 2027 date. There's a significant threat with very good capability, particularly in the uncrewed space. Given your location and your role for any of the 3 of you, what is your perspective on what our allies and partners are doing to kind of up the game and get ready for an incredible threat, particularly when it comes to uncrewed capabilities?
Well, thank you, classmate. Good to see you, Skip. Thanks again. I asked him to go easy on me, and he didn't do that at all.
No.
I'll pan back a bit and talk a few things. You've heard some senior leaders. As the operational commander of forces in the Western Pacific, no doubt this is a problem set that I think about every day. You've heard a number of other leaders talk that this is almost certainly, as you think about uncrewed or unmanned systems, that we're going to see no doubt a hybrid, not just a joint and combined force, because I don't think we'll ever go that alone, but that there will be a hybrid force of manned and unmanned, crewed and uncrewed systems. So how we incorporate those systems into our scheme of maneuver, absolutely critical. We have a concept that the CNO has written about in her NAV plan, unconventional sea denial, non-traditional sea denial, and you have heard my boss's boss, Admiral Paparo, speak to Hellscape. I'll let his comments stand on his own because I could not say them better. But nonetheless, I think that those will be some critical capabilities. Admiral Kaler talked about mass. 20 years ago, there were articles that precision might be the new mass. Well, I think mass is the new mass, to be quite honest with you. And so the work that you are doing, Skip, and that we have learned from in other theaters, including Ukraine and European theaters as well, that is going to help us with the mass problem in the Western Pacific should conflict ever emerge, although we work to deter that conflict every single day, and that is job one. You're absolutely right about the interoperability and what we hope is interchangeability. And I will share with the team and acknowledge that that is work that continues every day. And I'll be interested in Steve's observations because you're absolutely the implication of your question in terms of how we make those systems interchangeable, certainly not fratricidal, but complementary with 2 E's. Absolutely critical. So more work to do, and I think that's more work for the team of teams, not just on this side of the table, but for everyone out there. And Steve, I'd welcome your thoughts. Great line of questioning.
Yeah, I agree. That's tremendous line of questioning to think about because I'm thinking about how do we sense, how do we defend, how do we augment, how do we incorporate autonomous vehicles into our capabilities? I mean, I could go in many different directions here, and again, I go back to walking the floor here and seeing some of the ingenuity at play. And as we watch the video of what's happening in Ukraine and the incredible autonomy and innovation that's in the hands of the individual soldier and what they're being able to do on the battlefield, I'm thinking about how do we take that reality and incorporate that into a naval environment, because as we know, the output of the capabilities we have are often platform centric and crewed by individuals in that platform. So how do you put an individual drone in the hands of one sailor to be able to kind of augment your capabilities? And so we're thinking about that. How do we put a sensing drone in the hands of a sailor to persist on station when your crewed helicopter is not available or for any reason is perhaps just not available to be into the fight? We're finding ways now as we invest into, particularly into the ASW domain again, a web of both CERTAS type vehicles where we would embark these capabilities in a variety of platforms, not necessarily gray hulls as well, but how do we weave together that kind of capability, again with autonomous sensing capabilities to understand the undersea domain, to contribute to that fight. So are we in a position now where those bespoke capabilities are being deployed forward in mass? No, but are we finding ways each and every day to incorporate that further into our orbit? Absolutely. I'd also say that as we look to make those investments, we realize that we shouldn't always be seduced by what we're seeing today, because that influence is being prepared. You're not necessarily prepared for the fight of tomorrow. Obviously, autonomous vehicles feature quite strongly, and the innovation is extraordinary that we're seeing. But I think that if we believe that it's only going to be autonomous vehicles that are going to win the fight, we'd be sadly mistaken. And it's how do we find that right mix of autonomous vehicles capabilities with the human factor, the sailors that are going to underpin our success with their own innovation and their ability to sustain platforms on station. It's what is that sweet spot that we need in both of those capability areas? That's what I'm thinking about, and that's what we're trying to invest.
Yeah, that's great. I'd only add that I think we finally reached that inflection point of unmanned vehicles. And you just look around the displays here, there's a tremendous density of focus on autonomy. Probably largely demonstrated by Ukraine, how you can use something simple to create this asymmetric threat that really changes the complexion of the environment. I mean, the fleet's been screaming for this for decades. It's not for lack of attention, it's just hard. It's hard to get the power density, the communications, the navigation, very, very difficult. And to be able to create low-cost platforms that complement the manned, expensive platforms instead of competing with them is kind of what we've been searching for, and I think we're on that track. And clearly, this hip checks right into the allies and partners. It brings more of them into the fight on an affordable weapon system mentality. Great question. Thanks.
Good morning. Good morning, gentlemen. My height is killing me. First off, good morning. Thank you for your leadership at the Forward Edge. Very important. And to those historic leaders that are here. My question is this. The challenge of executing what the Admiral mentioned yesterday, which is joint warfighting and the functions of joint warfighting at the Forward Edge. FDNF, historically, your high op tempo, training is a challenge, operations, maintenance, always a challenge. How do we continue to improve in Westpac the innovative concept of the theme of this conference, and bringing that to the Forward Edge so that our warfighters, our joint warfighters, are keeping up with the current TTPs as well as the current capabilities to be able to fight at the highest end for the AOR. And again, thank you for your participation here.
Fred, I'm going to have you start that one.
Okay. No, really, really thoughtful question. And I think you'd be very pleased with what I would call, there really is a virtuous circle that happens as we talk about that team of teams from our Warfighting Development Center, 3rd Fleet, the TICOMs, and then our team forward as well. One, piggybacking on my classmate Skip's question, we are, one, making sure that we do not silo learning that is happening in other theaters. The Red Sea has made us more confident in the operations there, in our ships, our systems, and our sailors. We should be very, very confident. Now it is all leaders' jobs to make sure that that learning from the 5th Fleet and 6th Fleet Theater comes to our theater as well, recognizing that some of the conditions and the environment they face there will be different than what we face in the Western Pacific with a nuclear-armed near peer with temporarily at times larger numbers and interior lines. But nonetheless, lessons to be certainly applied. Now, we take that technology, and there is new technology that's being fielded in every deployment, every carrier strike group deployment, every patrol with the ARGs that I have loved and gone and deployed with as well. The Marine Corps has a tremendous innovation, culture of innovation that they roll out as well. And then we take those things, and then I think the value that we add is we see the real world operation. We do that training. We see how it responds to the environment, frankly, how our allies and partners work with that, as well as our potential adversaries. And then we feed that back into the system, both the training system and the technical system, as we go back to do everything from doctrine to tactics, techniques, and procedures, and certainly look for the next bit of capability that is going to allow us to have positional and capability advantage. So those things are very real and they're happening. Again, love the implications of your question and the premise of it. That is something that I think our senior leadership deserves great credit for in terms of the conditions that have been set so that we can learn. So we operate, we observe, we push that back, and then back to our stateside partners and our international partners, and then we iterate, and get better every time, every patrol, and every deployment. Thanks, sir.
I would add, and I like the way you teed this up with your touch on maintenance and sustainability, which is always the ugly twin of operations. And this is something this conference can focus on. How do we maintain this high fidelity training while we're either on or off the field? I will tell you, I think the maintenance model has been fixed out in FD&F. There's always, bad days in maintenance, but every ship gets every day of maintenance they're supposed to get. What's actually in that day, we continue to work on and improve. But if you're not maintaining that sustainability and you're able to be on the field when you actually need to be on the field, attrition comes in a lot of different ways. It could be a broken gas turbine generator. It can be a shot to the pilot house. Either way, there's a jersey that's off the field. And that's the circle of life you got to maintain. Hey, if you have something else to add, or did you look like you were going to ask it?
I'm going to jump in for a second, sir. Again, I tell my team I'm not a very complicated person. Combat readiness, safe operations ashore and at sea, and personal professional development, those have been my priorities since I first commanded. But you can have all the amazing concepts in the world. If you can't get your ships to sea on time and your aircraft in the air on time, those plans and concepts have very little value. So we focus, and the Admiral speaks the truth in terms of that. Steve, any thoughts or reflections on that great question?
I would just offer, of course, our model is a little bit different. Doesn't mean one is better or not as good as the others. But we do iterate and learn each and every instance. We've learned that self-sufficiency matters. A model where your sailor is simply an operator but not a maintainer is a flawed model. You need to be able to innovate and find ways to fix your own problems. And so that's important. We've also learned that in our readiness model that we can actually double tap our platforms. After they come home, we can change out a crew and send them out the door again before they go into deeper maintenance when they come home. And third, I would highlight the value of the fitted infrastructure and capabilities forward through 7th Fleet, through other allies such as Australia and Japan, because their shipyards and their capabilities matter. When we surge forward and operate in those regions, we need to leverage the infrastructure and, importantly, the logistics logistics to make that happen. I'd highlight a great example where we actually had a rearm of one of our frigates in Australia, a successful application of that after a missile shoot last year. And that effort, although it took a lot of effort, it highlighted the importance of logistics and having ammunition forward. But in the end of the day, it was actually an easier process doing that in Australia than it was in our own ammunition depot at home. And so that highlights that the power of allies and partners, what they can bring to enable a fight.
Yeah, you pulled a ripcord with this one, didn't you?
Yeah. If I could just add real quick, so the joint warfighting concept piece of it, and ability for our naval forces to stay in the fight, sustain the fight, with respect to operating in the WES, as the Admiral mentioned yesterday, working with our Air Force partners, working with the Marines, as mentioned already, the Army, the capabilities to do that, not only from an operational battle management C2 level, but even at the tactical level, to be able to communicate at speed and execute at speed. How's that going, and do you need anything with that, any help with that?
Well, conceptually, and I'll turn it over to Fred here, and when Fred comes back to the Pentagon, which I'm sure is unavoidable in his future, KT's experienced it, I experienced it, you bring a lot of realism to the conversation with the joint warfighting concept. We got into the pulse ops conversation, fighting within the WES. Well, what about for people who live in the WES? So you pulsing in, you pulsing out, how's that all going to stitch together? And it ended up in real change on the reality of where they actually live and operate. And you really appreciate Japan's in a very rough neighborhood. And you're on their target list just like they are. And it's quite eye-opening. Fred?
No, big believer in the joint warfighting concept. Fought that concept in a globally integrated, fully informed war game. And we are seeing our service leaders working to develop the Navy warfighting concept to fit and nest in that. I think the work that's been done there, when you go from the classic, 7 joint functions to the way that that's expressed amongst the 4 two-way battle, so to speak. Very, very good concept, easily understandable as well. Work continues. But I am highly confident of what we are doing both in theater and back home for those that are support us, that there's some there that we're going to execute. So I appreciate the conversation. That's very alive and well, both in the Western Pacific, but also back to our naval leaders in the Pentagon as well.
Bill.
Bill Hamlet, Naval Institute Proceedings. My question is, down the level of warfare into hybrid, gray zone, maritime insurgency, whatever you want to call it, over the past decade plus, the Chinese have been acting more and more aggressively. Their claims to the entire 9-dash line, South China Sea, they started building up atolls into islands, and then even though Xi Jinping said he wouldn't militarize them, he has militarized those islands. What's the hope that a decade from now, the entire South China Sea isn't de facto Chinese blue territory? And I know that this is a sort of national level policy question and you don't set policy, but as you talk, Admiral Waddell and Admiral Kacher, with your foreign counterparts, Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, ASEAN, et cetera, how do we collectively, the big we, push back against that behavior, those excessive claims, so that 10 years from now, China hasn't rewritten the international norms and the way we live and really undercut freedom of the seas?
Thank you, sir, for the question. And I'll thank both USNI Proceedings and Hunter Stiers for the great work you did in terms of the Maritime Coin series in the Western Pacific. It gave us a lot to think about. You kindly alluded to the fact that there are some policy implications to those questions. I'm not going to venture into the territory of trying to guess what sovereign leaders are going to do or are going to think. But here's what I know as the commander of operational forces in the Western Pacific. We believe in everyday exercise and support the notion of a free and open Indo-Pacific, and that we will fly, sail, and operate wherever international law allows, so that others may as well. And that final point, as I share that, so we're going to continue to exercise that right that is afforded to us under international law, and by having other like-minded nations do the same, and we're very grateful for Canada's efforts in that area. We talked about a couple Taiwan Strait transits that they participated in, transits through the South China Sea for other nations as well. Again, this is bigger than one nation. And I truly believe that the best way to preserve that right is to exercise it, and exercise it not just one country, but many like-minded nations, because that is the lifeblood to that system that I talked about that has done so much for the world over the last 80 years.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, because as you reflect back over the last 10 years or so of simply, from a Canadian perspective, enabling our maneuver through our ratification of UNCLOS, we have unfettered ability to operate in international waters. We exercise that routinely. Why wouldn't we? That's afforded to us under international law. So Straits Passage, innocent passage, these are fundamental principles of operating in the global commons. And just because atolls are turned into islands, that does not make them a de facto piece of territory. But there's only so much you do in terms of, as you call them, freedom of navigation operations, to actually change behavior. After 10 years of having done that, has it changed the Chinese thinking and how they choose to approach operationalizing and enacting territorial claims in the area? I don't know. At the end of the day, military forces and their units enable political discourse and policy direction. So we can continue to do as we are doing, and it's the right thing to do under an international law, but it has to be backstopped by a concerted, combined effort from our politicians to make sure that we press back against those norms. We are an operational enabler of political decision. And so that's what we must do, and we must continue to do, and we will continue to do. But I don't know what it looks like 10 years from now if we keep doing that and the Chinese haven't changed their behavior.
Hey, thanks, Steve. I'll just add, then we'll go to the final question here. Gray zone is where we've struggled. Fortunately, it's an area where the allies and partners excel, and our Coast Guard excels. So when you get into the cross-agency world of who is good at what, that's an area where we're learning a lot from our friends. I mean, Navy's good at blowing stuff up. We're not necessarily great about conversation. There are areas in the Western Pacific that we can't gain access without an ally or partner. So we're getting better at it, but that's the game. Keep it from escalating, keep it on those terms, and keep it friendly. Yes, sir.
Good morning, Mike Mann. Admiral, the one dimension in naval warfare that we're not seeing in the Red Sea that you live with every day, and that capability is growing and getting more advanced every day, is the submarine threat. And my question is, to the extent that you can answer it, how are you using current operations to shape their perception of what the future fight would be? And are you actually actively, to the extent that you can answer this, actively prosecuting out-of-area deployers from both Russia and China? And I have one other quick question. How does Vietnam factor into your shaping up for the future fight?
As a submariner, I probably know too much classification to answer that. I'll turn it over to Fred.
Okay, this is like amateur hour next to the PhD here. But here's what I'll share, Admiral. Great to see you. Thank you for your mentorship over the years as well, and a great question. We maintain a generational advantage in the USW domain. I'm not going to talk too specifically, as you obviously know the business, just as you alluded to, and I won't talk too specifically to that, but I can tell you we are absolutely a learning organization. The work we're doing with 3rd and 7th Fleet, applying the lessons with each and every year as we watch potential adversaries deploy, I am highly, highly confident in our capability. We are applying learning and lessons with each iteration. And I remain extremely confident in our undersea capabilities and our undersea leaders as well. And it's probably best that I leave it at that. With respect to Vietnam, had the great opportunity to, in fact, go in with a U.S. Coast Guard cutter, as well as Blue Ridge to Cam Bay for the first time in some time. Vietnam, absolutely, the relationship is more than just their location, but they're in a pivotal place at a pivotal time, and that relationship is only growing. They, like many of the other nations in the region, have looked at the developments and the behaviors over the last 10 years of other nations, and they are interested in working with us. It's an interesting thing. Both human beings and nations, it's not so much what they say, but what they do that speaks volume about their character and intent. And I think Vietnam has seen that we want to work very, very hard to be the partner of choice in the region. And so we look forward to continued opportunities with them. Steve,
Hey, I'll just
anything?
add on the ASW threat without any real detail, but it was our original cross-domain fight. It's how we handle the ASW threat, the ASW mission against the submarine threat. It takes a village to prosecute submarines, and we're very confident in the mission. All domains are involved. And as a junior officer on my first attack submarine, I got absolutely crushed by a Canadian frigate. So I'd like to turn that over to Steve and see what he has to say.
Absolutely.
I think I'll just add my 30 seconds to that. Having been inside the tent a little bit in Second Fleet, I can confidently say that I've been very impressed at the orchestration of response, in particular to out-of-area deployers, having been intimately involved in a response in my time in Norfolk, but more importantly, how the United States Navy finds ways to share information and bring together a collaborative response to dealing with, in particular, maritime avenues of approach and threat vectors to the continent, and just been very confident in what I've seen.
All right.
Sir.
Admiral Mers, Admiral Kacher, Admiral Waddell, thank you for your time today, for being here. This was a really great in-depth conversation. We appreciate it. As a small token of our appreciation, we have a Naval Institute book for each of you, The Neptune Factor by Nicholas Lambert, Alfred Thayer Mahan, and the Concept of Sea Power. It's a terrific read. If you haven't read it yet, I recommend it. Everything you should have known as a JO about Alfred Thayer Mahan, much easier to read than Mahan's original. But thank you all, and for our audience, thanks for your questions. Please join me in a round of applause for our panelists. Before you head to lunch, please take a moment to provide feedback on the panel in the survey session in the West app. Thank you very much.